Hello and welcome back. In Module 6, our learning objective 3 is to look at those factors that are examples of public policies aimed at increasing economic growth. And two of the specific objectives, one, describe the law of diminishing returns, and two, summarize the catch-up effect, are what I'd like to explain today. Okay, the law of diminishing returns basically says that, well, we can try to, as a government, increase policies that either increase the savings or increase the investment. And savings is the idea that we're going to save our money, and we're going to probably, let's just say, a basic savings account at a bank. Investment is where we're actually going to use that money and invest it back into the economy. Both of these ideas, savings and investment, will increase capital, and this will cause our productivity and living standards to rise. However, what's interesting is that as we raise capital, the additional output that we get from that increase in capital diminishes over time. So let me just go ahead and minimize this for a second, and let me show you what I mean. So if you think about it, and let's take a really simple example. Let's say that you're going to become your manager at work, or you're a manager at a Walmart, okay? And you anticipate it's going to be a pretty busy day. And so we're going to put your labor here, okay, your number of workers, and then we're going to put their productivity per worker over here, okay? So if we have no workers, obviously we have no productivity. If we add one person to the mix, okay, this is going to increase, and let's say by 5 output, okay? So 5 more customers are being served that weren't in our Walmart example. Now when I add a second worker, most people would think that this graph here should proportionately go up in a straight line. And that's actually not the case. What happens is that as we add the second worker, the productivity that we get out of that worker is going to be something less than 5. Let's say it's going to be 9 total, so 4 workers were served, or 4 more customers were served. As we continue to add worker after worker after worker, this line actually will level out, and then it will actually turn downward over time. So here's the question, why? So why does that happen? Well, the idea is not necessarily that worker 2 shirks responsibility or isn't motivated. It's that there takes a coordination of effort to make the work happen. So the more workers that you get, so as we increase the labor, the more coordination that it takes. And that coordination takes away from productivity. And so productivity will increase, our output per worker will increase, but it will increase at a decreasing rate. And this is the idea of diminishing returns to capital. And I use diminishing returns to labor as an example instead of capital. You can imagine capital being something like having a tractor. If you're a farmer and you have a tractor and you can get one tractor in there, you can harvest 5 tons of wheat. When you bring in a second tractor, though, you're not going to be able to gain another 5 tons of wheat. You're going to gain something less, perhaps 4 tons of wheat. As you put in another tractor, then you can only increase your output by, say, let's see, 12. Now you have 12 tons of wheat, but notice that the output that you're getting for each time you increase your capital diminishes over time. And there does become this point right here that is the right amount of, in this case, capital or tractors to have. Because if you only have perhaps a 60-acre field and you have 5 tractors on that field, they're going to be running into each other and it's just not going to be productive. So this is the idea of diminishing returns to capital. So here's another example of this diminishing returns to capital, and it says if we have our capital per worker, again, just kind of the same example I just gave, and the output per worker, if we take this, we see that originally there's quite a bit of output and then that actually decreases over time. So this idea of diminishing returns. Okay. Our second objective in Module 6, Learning Objective 3, is to summarize the catch-up effect. Well, using that idea of the law of diminishing returns, we can analyze a thing called the catch-up effect, which explains why less developed nations will grow more rapidly than more developed nations. Okay, so let's imagine that we make the same investment in a poor country. We'll use Mali in this example. And we make the same investment in, it doesn't matter. It could be capital per labor hour, as you see in this graph. How do I know? Because it's listed here. Or it could be human capital per labor hour, however you wanted to look at it. And then we have a rich country's growth. Let's use the UK as the rich country. So Mali's going to start off right here at point A. And we're going to make an investment in capital. And so we are giving Mali some type of capital to use. So let's say we're going to give them a tractor, okay, for lack of a better idea. Then we're going to, the UK is here at point B, and we're going to invest the same amount of capital in the UK. What we see is that, and this is kind of a bowed graph here like this, what we see is that regardless if both countries have the same investment, but look what happens in terms of their output or their productivity. We see that Mali goes from point A up the curve, and it increases its growth quite a bit from that original investment with their original investment of a tractor. The same tractor investment was made in the UK. The UK, however, though, starts way up here. It's a relatively rich country. And so the amount of benefit, if you will, or the amount of output per labor hour is not as beneficial, is not as great. So the catch-up effect really does explain why poor countries tend to grow more rapidly than rich ones, because it's a factor of where you start on the curve and how many resources that you already have available. Because Mali doesn't have many resources, it gets quite a return from those resources. But because the UK has a lot of resources, it doesn't get as much of a return. Okay, so we can see an example here of the catch-up effect. South Korea had a very similar investment of GDP, increased investment by the same amount of GDP, and yet Korea grew by greater than 6%, where the U.S. only grew by 2%. And again, the catch-up effect is the reason, because Korea was not as developed originally, and so it got a lot more benefit by that investment. And that investment could be any one of the factors that we've talked about in this chapter. It could be capital, it could be natural resources, it could be labor, or it could be human capital. Any of those would be susceptible to this idea of the catch-up effect. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions. And that does it for the instructor-led portion of Module 6. Thanks.